Hello, my name is David Montesano. I'm president of College Match, an admission strategist here. And welcome to College Week Live's session, and this is for transfers, on improving your transfer admission outlook. Getting off the wait list is what we're going to be helping you look at doing today. Let's talk a little bit about what transferring is all about. In a sense, transferring is different than regular admission. One of the things that you kind of have to consider as a transfer is that there may be a little bit less room at the school. And why I say that, and just kind of think about this, is that basically transferring is a little bit like entering a crowded nightclub. Two people have to leave before two more can enter. So you kind of have to wait in line and see if there's any attrition, basically, if you know what that term means. Attrition basically just means this, and this is one of the ways that you can look at it. How many freshmen return for sophomore year, right? So freshman retention is a number that you should be looking at if you're looking at transferring. Does the school have any room? If there's 98 to 100% freshman retention, there may not be enough room to transfer, right? The other thing you should look at is kind of the overall graduation rate. That's another indicator that there may be some room at the school. Most schools do have room, just to let you know. So here's some simple, kind of numbers here just to kind of give you a sense of some popular schools, what the transfer rates might look like from UC Berkeley and Georgetown, USC, UCLA, down to George Washington here. It's kind of interesting. These numbers are a couple years old. It takes that long to basically gather the numbers. But just to kind of give you an idea, this is sort of an interesting way to look at it. So you notice that UC Berkeley's admit rate is about 23% roughly for transfers. I don't know if you know this, but basically that's almost the same as the admit rate overall for UC Berkeley. So that's actually pretty great. The next thing that I wanted to mention is that you can see here that some schools have lower transfer admission rates, like Tufts. And part of this is that Tufts is a private school, and Berkeley, for example, is public. Some of the public schools tend, like UVA and Michigan, tend to have a little bit more room. I should say a lot more room than some of the privates. But again, it just depends on the school. And we're talking about the most competitive schools here. So obviously this is going to seem a little tighter than some. Now, if you look at the ultimate kind of competition level schools, places like Stanford and Harvard, those schools will have, minuscule amounts of transferring possibility. In fact, sometimes schools like Harvard will just stop transfers altogether. But that's really rare, and I don't mean to scare you. Let me mention that at the outset. There definitely is room at schools. You just kind of have to make sure that you're getting the best data on that, okay? And just remember that it's different from the freshman admission data, and you want to really look specifically for transfer admission data. One good source of this is the College Board has some good data college by college on what their transfer admission rates are like. So go ahead and email me if you have any questions about any of that. That's good stuff. Let's go ahead and look at the next slide here, which kind of talks more or less about how admission works, right? So there's some new rules for admission that I'd really like to try to get across to you. One of the things that most people have thought about in the past is that admission's really going to be based on my grades and my test scores, the SAT or ACT. Now those definitely are taken into consideration. But one other thing when you're transferring is that sometimes your high school grades can be also a part of this, all right? It's really important that those will be considered often. And you need to make sure that if they're not great, if they're not stellar, that at least there's a step up. In college, you're doing either comparable or better work. That's really important. Colleges and admission officers in particular love to see an upward trend, okay, in terms of your grades. So grades in class rank, if you're ranked at a high school. Now, if you're at a private school, sometimes you're not ranked. Independent schools, for example, don't rank. But one of the really important things here to think about is that basically you, in effect, your grades are the bedrock of your entire admission picture, okay? So grades have to be kept high. I mean, that's the most important thing. If I could give you one message, it's keep your grades as high as possible, because that's really what matters. They're about 75% of the picture is going to be your grades, okay? And that may include, as I mentioned, high school grades too. You're going to have to show those on your applications more than likely, or at least send your transcripts in. They're probably just going to look at your last couple years of grades. But the most important thing to them is going to be your freshman year in college or your freshman and sophomore year, okay, in college. Those are really going to be what they're exactly looking for. And so it's critical that those grades show, as I mentioned, an upward trend. It's really important that you don't have any D's or C's or anything like that, that you're able to kind of cleanse your transcripts by retaking classes. Remediating them is the term that I use. It's kind of like remediating hazardous waste. You got to remediate bad grades and get rid of them. And the way to do that is to take those classes over. So that's just one way to do things to improve your grades. There's a really good book that I recommend too if you're worried about your grades. And that is called What Smart Students Know. I really recommend getting this book. It kind of focuses on the 20% of things that bring you the 80% benefit, not the other way around. So it really helps you focus on only the things that matter in terms of improving your grades. It's aimed at high schoolers, but it works for college as well. Okay, so there's that. And then the other thing that you can do certainly to improve your grades is to get help, right? To get some kind of tutoring assistance. Most colleges have tutoring centers and offer after class support. You can obviously talk to your teachers, professors, other classmates, and also sometimes the teaching assistants are really supportive. So it just depends on if you're in a big school or a little school. But basically, it's important for you to kind of think about where can I maintain as scrupulously as possible my grades. How can I improve those? There's nothing more important for you at this moment. Okay, test scores do matter as well, but they're less important. Just to let you know, those might not even really be reported out by the colleges, meaning that they may not take your test scores and report those out to the public in U.S. News and World Report. They're going to report out the freshman test scores more than likely, not the transfer test scores. So if you do have a testing difficulty, it's probably going to be okay. I wouldn't worry about it quite as much. But you're going to want to explain it. Obviously, they're going to look at testing. They're going to look at SAT or ACT tests in most cases. You can look for the requirements on their admission sites. But so if they do require it, then that means they care about it. And if they care about it, it means that you're going to want to be at or above the mean scores at that school, just like you're going to want to be at or above the mean high school GPA and at or above the mean transfer GPA. And again, that stuff, you can find that either on college data or on the College Board website, are both good sources of information. Any questions about any of that stuff? Does that make sense? Okay, we're going to move on a little bit and talk about the next part. Half is what I think of when I think about college admission, is that the other half of the picture, once you get through the initial hurdles, which are your test score, your GPA, class rank, and test scores, then you're looking at really activities. And colleges, especially private schools, we're talking about, these are the new rules of admission, right? So got to throw this in here because it's really the new stuff that's going on. The new rules are that extracurricular activities count for as much as half of the picture. And that's really where the entire game is played once you get through those initial hurdles of GPA and SAT or ACT score, okay? So really what you need to do here is think about, what do I do really well? What do I focus on? It's all about focus. What are you great at? They're going to build a well-rounded class of individual experts. You've got to be great at one thing. Think about what you've really done in your past, both in high school, the last 2 years of high school, and the last year or two that you've spent in college. And you have to kind of say to yourself, what am I great at? What can be supported by evidence? What do I love to do? First of all, what do I love to do? And then what's supported by evidence, okay? That's kind of the way that you should be thinking about it. So go ahead and give that a thought for a second. Obviously, you're watching this presentation because you're transferring, so it's worth it for you to think about that for a second. What do people say I'm the best at? What do my teachers, my classmates, my friends, my parents, what does everyone say that I'm the best at? What are professors marking me down and giving me A grades for? What do I do well, okay, academically? Could be outside of class too. Maybe you're a great debater or something like that. Maybe you build computer systems. I don't know. But basically, you need to write that down right now because this is your point of difference or your comparative advantage in the applicant pool. And without that, there's really no basis for admission. Remember, colleges are now looking at these academic extracurriculars, and they're making decisions based on those. Not on just grades and test scores, but on those. That's really where the game's played, okay? So any questions about that, please go ahead and send in a question. You can type it in there. All right, so let's look at how admission's done in general. There's a way to look at this, and I've got kind of an interesting little diagram to show this. So basically, it's not so much that you're being admitted, I should say that at the outset. It's that your application's being admitted. And smart people and people who have been through this process before successfully know that. They know how to manipulate the symbols. That's all it is. Just you're kind of reducing yourself, in a sense, to symbols on a few pages. You might have an interview, but an interview really doesn't count for much. It can only help you. It can't hurt you. But really, that's not the differentiator. As I said before, it's grades, test scores, and extracurriculars. Now we're looking at, overall, kind of how do colleges think about this whole thing, right? How do they figure out who they're going to admit? And that's what I like to term the competitive dynamic. And I say it's competitive because you do have competition. There are other applicants in the applicant pool, clearly, right? This isn't just you applying directly and getting in, or some committee making a decision only on you. It's not sole sourced. Basically, what this is it's a committee or a first reader and then a committee, and they're making a decision based on all the other possibilities that they have. Think about it this way. Put yourself in their shoes, okay? Their dream college that you want to apply to, or dream colleges, hopefully it's more than one, is going to have unmet needs. And the most important thing is to crack the code, figure out what their unmet needs are, and look at basically how are they able, okay, to go from, saying they're here to, really when they're here, and how can you help them get where they want to go? I like Stanford as an example. So Stanford is the second hardest school in America to get into. They have people with national level extracurriculars because national level school. And 40% of the class, and we'll talk about this in a second, is probably going to be taken up by athletes, minorities, and legacies. So there's about 60% of the spots left. They have very, very few slots for transfers. But the interesting thing here is that they still have unmet needs. Okay, and so part of this is really digging into Stanford and figuring out who they are and what they say they're about, and then what the reality is in terms of where they're heading versus where they are now. There's kind of a disconnect there a little bit, and there is for everybody or every institution. So for Stanford, they say they kind of compare themselves or benchmark themselves against Harvard and Yale, but in fact they weren't ever really affiliated, in fact, with kind of this church affiliation that Harvard and Yale had. So they lack some of the humanities stuff. It's more modeled after MIT and Cornell, typically. It's the first, in a sense, the first American university. And so God didn't enter the picture. They were really focused more on this kind of German model. In fact, their mottos, may the winds of freedom blow. It's in German, not in Latin. So the interesting thing is Stanford each and every day needs to sort of augment what they already have in terms of really great humanities. So if somebody comes to Stanford with a great art portfolio, I mean a really, really high-level art portfolio, national level or great art portfolio, their chance of getting in may be higher than somebody who has a national portfolio with science and engineering, believe it or not. Why? Because Stanford each and every day can choose the number one or number two person in science and engineering, but they don't always get that person who's the top vocalist or the top dancer or the top sculptor. That's something that Stanford has to kind of replenish year after year. So that's just an example. If there's any other schools you want me to look at, we can talk about those, okay? So basically, the other thing to look at here is that's the college on one end, and then there's you on the other, right? And in between, you've got these applicants in the applicant pool, and they've got strengths and weaknesses, right? Will we know who they are? Will we know what their strengths and weaknesses are the year that you're applying? Probably not. There's really no way to know. But we can sort of look at the past and say some of the trends, we can start to see some of those trends. One of the best sites for seeing who actually is in the applicant pools, and this is really the only site that I'm aware of out there that gets into this level of detail in such a comprehensive way, is College Data. College Data has a scattergram that you can look at where you can click on these little dots and see their background. In other words, their extracurriculars, whether or not they were an athlete, a minority, a legacy, where else they applied, all that stuff. It's one of the best sites for data out there. Of course, the data is a couple years old. It's not scientific. It's anecdotal, meaning people just kind of populate it with, they go on there and they just put their stuff up. There's no, it's not a scientific sample. But anyway, I do think it's really, really helpful to look at that scattergram that they have. And it's called tracker results, okay? Admission tracker results on the College Data website. So anyway, and there's a lot more information, by the way, at my website, which is collegematchus.com. You can like us on Facebook, and it's College Match US. You can also check out my book, which is Brand You. It's all about how you can brand yourself, position yourself for success. And that's really what we're doing here. We're positioning you. That's what this little competitive dynamic model is. So there's you on one end of a log, okay? And and then there's this you're trying to get to this college on the other. But in between you, there's a bunch of there's some other people sitting there. So basically, how can you get the attention of the professor on the other end of the log? Basically, the school. What you really need to do is you need to figure out what you're good at. Okay, so you're kind of your core, who you are as a person, your goal for your life, your values, your needs educationally, socially. But more important than anything, as we talked about, how are you different than everybody else? I don't, in a sense, I don't care how you're the same as everybody. That's not going to help you get in. How you're different is going to help you get in. So think about that. What do you do that's different? And think about what you do that's different first and foremost academically. And then secondarily, how you do stuff that's leadership oriented. Leadership will not get you into college. Academic stuff will get you in, and then leadership is secondary, and that will help get you in, but it's not the main thing that you want to lead with. So let me give you an example. If you're doing a lot of different stuff leadership-wise, but you also do just a little bit of academic stuff, say tutoring people in calculus, guess what? On your extracurriculars, you want to list tutoring people in calculus first, and then the leadership stuff that you've done, okay? Even if it's an Eagle Scout or something like that. It just really matters less to the colleges than the academic stuff that you've done. All right, so what our goal is here is to align basically your points of difference to bypass the weaknesses to meet an unmet need at that school, and that's how you get in. Okay, and somebody here just mentioned that they wanted to look at Syracuse and kind of crack the code there instead of Stanford. So let's look at Syracuse for a second. What do we know about Syracuse, right? We know a couple things. We know it's a fairly large private university. We know it's synonymous with sports. They have great business programs, a great, amazing communication school, one of the top. The Newhouse School is one of the top, and that's the founders of Condé Nast Publications. So it's a really it's a prestigious school, but one of the things about it is that it plays, in a sense, part of the thing is it is a bit big, right? So and there are these kind of airtight compartments a little bit. It's not liberal arts where you kind of free flowing, classes between departments quite as much. Although it's not like a mega university like say Michigan's a little bit tougher. It's a little bit more flowy than Michigan. But just suffice to say that there's still these departments. And basically what you want to do for Syracuse is I think one of the things is you want to go and talk to students about their likes and dislikes. But I bet if you ask somebody about their dislikes, they might say, well, one of the problems is that departments don't talk to one another, or it's a little bit big. One of the things, so just for example, if the school is a little bit big or the departments don't talk to each other, if you at your high school were able to break down barriers between either, different groups of people or departments at your school or subjects, somehow you did something interdisciplinary, for example, you could point to that as proof and say, hey, look, Syracuse, I'll do that again for you. Or if you were able to build community at sort of a bigger school, like a public school, for example, and you had something like, some kind of club that you started, you could say to Syracuse, look, I'm going to do the same thing for you. I'm really good at building community, and I'll do that again. And that, again, first, your promise of value needs to be academic, but then that would be something that would help tip things in your favor. Let's talk about admission, because a lot of people, for a lot of reasons, I think, have kind of a warped view of admission rates. Okay, so what is an admission rate anyway, right? I mean, you look at it, I have a 25% chance. Does that mean that you have a 25% chance if a school has a 25% acceptance rate? I wonder, right? No, you really don't. That's what we call a blended rate. Everybody has a different rate. So I might have a different rate than you. If I'm a legacy, my mom or dad went there as an undergraduate, my rate on a 25% or something like that school might be 50% chance or even higher. If I'm a recruited athlete, there's a spot for me on the water polo team or on the football team, and the coach has places that they can reserve with the admission office, then that means that probably I'm going to get in at one of the higher rates. I might even get in at a 60, 70% or higher rate. And then if I'm an underrepresented minority, African American, Native American, Latino, not necessarily Asian American, depends on the school, right? It's really important to look at those numbers, and that's something, if you are Asian American, I recommend that you definitely look at the Asian American numbers, because where you'll get a bump for admission will be at places that have fewer Asian American numbers. Just like if you're Latino, if you're at a school and there's too many Latinos, well, there's never too many minorities. Don't worry about that. But if you're ever at a school where it just won't count for as much, right? A good rule of thumb for that, by the way, if you're looking at flags and tags for ethnicity, is if a school has, say, under 10% of a certain population, that might be an indication that you will get some extra consideration. Now, private schools are different than public in this regard. The public schools, by the Bakke court case, are not allowed to really consider race as part of the admission process. They do in some small ways, but it's more about economics typically. So that if you are applying to public schools, let me repeat this: that race may play a smaller role, but you still want to reach out to the Minority Affairs Department, and you still want to have them help you a little bit and guide you, and maybe even mention you to the admission office. The other thing you want to do, so you can kind of get coded with the Minority Affairs Department, you also want to, if you are first generation to go to college, that's a really prestigious thing for colleges to admit people first generation. They actually record the number of first generation admits. For public schools, they can absolutely do that. If you're low income, there are certain scholarships that also code you that way. But it's important to get coded to be in these little categories. So remember this: low income, first generation, minority, Latino, Asian American, Native American, or African American. Those all work. Okay. Anyway, so if you are in one of these flags or tags, about 40% of the class is going to be taken up by these. So there are, That's a lot. This is a private school, not a public school. So just imagine that instantly 40% of the spots are all just disappearing, right? And you've only got 60% of the spots left. That makes it what? More competitive, right? So let's go back to this. What happens when NYU, on a 30% acceptance rate, takes out 40%? Well, it's going to be, it's going to be somewhere around 20% or less. Okay, so that means that for everybody else who isn't a legacy, meaning mom or dad attended as an undergrad, and it may count skip level or siblings, just depends on the school. Some are more liberal than others. And if you're not an underrepresented minority at that particular school, underrepresented, you got to look at the numbers. And if you're not an athlete that's recruited, you'll know. It doesn't mean just playing sports. It means you're recruited for sports team, and you're talking to the coach, and they have a spot for you, and they're willing to talk to the admission office on your behalf, and they tell you that you're on the top of their list. Then basically your chances dwindle, right? They go from being a 30% roughly to, somewhere around 20% or less, which isn't that great. And when you're looking at schools like Stanford, Harvard, et al. That have, admit rates that are 6%, right? But way below 10%, then you're getting to a number that's just abysmally low, meaning statistically almost impossible, because you're looking at numbers like 3.8%, that kind of thing. Now, again, I just want to mention to you transfer admit rates. You really need to look at the transfer admit rates if you're looking. A couple people here have mentioned Princeton and Rice. Rice might be different than Princeton, but what you really want to do is get a guidebook like U.S. News and World Report, something like that, and that's kind of helpful, because what you can do, I'll show you, just get something like this, right? Boom, just grab this, go in here, and look up, under the best national universities, okay, you can see basically here where it says there's going to be the graduation performance, right? They're really big about measuring whether or not the school actually graduates people on time. But the other thing that you can do is you can look in here and say, you can see the freshman retention rate. So if we're going to look at Princeton, just to kind of give you an idea, it's a 98% freshman retention rate. That just means that there's not a lot of space for transfers, right? Very, very, very little. And Harvard, which stopped transfers altogether, has a 98, and they might have started up again this year, I'll have to check, but 98% average freshman retention rate, which is exactly the same. So, and look at this, Yale's is 99%. So when you get to a place like Rice at 97, is there room for transferring? Maybe, but I mean, not a lot, right? So I wouldn't bank on that. What you need to do is diversify your risk into a portfolio of super reach in the case of Rice and Princeton, or Harvard and Stanford, and then reach, meaning all the way down to 25%, and then 50% shots. Schools that, for transferring ability, you have a 50% shot at getting in. Not a 50% acceptance rate necessarily, but you have a 50% shot. And that's going to be based on a lot of things like the top 10% numbers, where you are in the GPA area, where you are in your extracurriculars is going to matter too. If it's a school that gets national level extracurriculars, then you need to be at that level, right? Stanford and Harvard and Princeton are all examples of that. If you don't have something that's really going to set you apart from all the other people in America, then your chances are obviously lower. Much, much lower. Okay, so I've said enough about that. All right. Any other questions about any of this? Now, I'm talking a lot about these most difficult schools to get into. Part of the reason that I do that, there is a little bit of a method to this. It's not because, I think everyone should apply to those schools. Not at all. They may not be right for you. But what I think that's interesting is that basically, if you aim for whatever your super reach choice is, then chances are you're going to hit everything else on the way down in your list. But again, you should have reaches, 50% shots, and safeties as a transfer. Remember that. And I really implore you not to look at the freshman data. Do not look at freshman data. That's not going to help you get in. All that data is misleading, because what you need is transfer admission data. And you need fresh transfer admission data. You might even call the colleges up. That's what I would do. Call them up and say, hey, what was it this past year? They won't know this year. There's no way for them to tell you when you're applying what the admit rate's going to be like. But you can ask them about what was their acceptance rate for transfers. You can ask them also how many were placed on the wait list and how many got in from that wait list, okay? And you can ask, is it a ranked wait list as well? Okay. Let's go ahead and go to the next thing here. We already went through that. Let's go to the next. So here just are some schools that have typically high transfer acceptance rates. You need to do your own research, obviously, or work with a consultant. But basically, I would say that, essentially, these schools here just typically had some really, really high and beautifully high transfer acceptance rates. And some of these schools are quite good, too. Just to kind of let you know, for example, here, You know, University of Oregon is a very sought after school. So is Washington State, University of Denver. Calvin College is an amazing liberal arts college. It happens to have engineering. Arizona State's really popular school, has some really good programs. Communications being one of the best there. Um, and anyway, Hollins, these great. These are all good schools. I mean, some of these have some really interesting things to offer. So, just to let you know, Ohio State, obviously a huge, great research university. It's more of a polytechnic. But anyway, you can kind of see these are some popular schools that have really good transfer rates. Um, question again, we talked about this. The yield rates for freshmen and transfers. You got to ask yourself that question. And does the college rank your wait list? And do you know what the college's unmet needs are, the ones that you're applying to? You have to know this. You know, a lot of people, and I'll just say that millionaires and billionaires hire people like me to help them figure out what the unmet needs are at the colleges. You can do this yourself. You just have to spend the time really cracking the code on the school. Why let all those other people get in ahead of you? You have just as much of a chance, okay? So just think about that. You know, it's all about information. Information's power. You can do your own sleuthing and research. That will help you get in, okay? Here's just an example for fun. I want to talk a little bit about the University of California system. Those are really sought after schools, and they have great transfer possibilities. They really admit a lot of people. So, for example, UCSD here, they had 27, and this is in 2010, just as a disclaimer, but in 2010, they had 2,700 roughly students in the waitlist process for transfer, okay? And basically 27.8% accepted a waitlist spot. Okay, just to kind of give you an idea. So not everybody even accepted a spot on the waitlist. So that's something that you really want to think about. And I'm going to get to this in a second. But same thing here with UCSB, right? 11,000 perspectives, only 6,000, really, you know, roughly half that number accepted the spot, right? And you know, and then 54% were accepted. So those are good odds, in my opinion. Now, colleges, as I mentioned, they're not looking for well-rounded. They're looking for angular students. They want value that meets their need, not your needs, and that provides diversity. I don't mean diversity so simply as ethnic diversity or economic diversity, but more like academic or intellectual diversity. Think about that. That's really what you're marketing. What are your points of difference, right? What's your proven value? Where can you say, hey, I was good at math. How can you prove that? Well, I tutor math. That's a way to prove it. I tutor 10 kids, or I tutor one person who has, you know, a disability, whatever it is. You can prove that pretty easily, okay? And that's, you got to really just kind of dig deep and think about it. Financial. This is really important. I got to emphasize this. There are people at private schools that will not be paying, that will be paying full fare, right? That don't need financial aid. If possible, don't ask for financial aid. It's just kind of a strategic tool because all things being equal, if you ask for financial aid, they're less likely to admit you. Not all schools can be need blind, and even if they're need blind, they can be partially need blind, or you know, need blind in certain ways. And I just would hate for you not to get into that school, okay? So again, obviously, if you have to have financial aid, you do need to ask for it. But if there's a way around that, then you know, please try to. Okay. Again, back to your points of difference. Figure out athletic ones, academic or leadership oriented. But remember to architect those as academic first, then leadership, etc. Okay. Focus on the college's unmet needs, academic. If it's financial, obviously you wouldn't want to ask for financial aid. And then let's talk about if you get on the wait list, what happens. Okay. Because there is a way that you can approach the wait list strategically. Okay. And here's an example of a waitlist letter, okay? Basically, what you want to do, the number one thing for the schools, you got to put yourself in their shoes. That's the most important thing, right? And that is to say, what do they want? As a teenager, your brain's kind of hardwired for you to think about yourself and just kind of to be a little bit self-absorbed. I don't know if you know that. It's not a bad thing. I was at your age. But when you get older, you're less so. And so it's hard for you to think, but you've got to really make a concerted effort, I believe, to think outside of yourself and think about them and put them first. If you put them first, you get in. It's that simple. So think about the school. And I want you to think about what's the risk for them in admitting you, right? Even if off of a wait list. One of the biggest risks, and nobody will tell you this, or you might not think of this right away, is that you may not show up. Did you just see the stat that I gave you about UCSD and UC Santa Barbara, where only a third or half of the people really took the spots that were offered, right? Why do you think that is? Well, it's because they had other options, right? It wasn't that they didn't go to college. They all went to college more than likely, or the majority did. It's because they went somewhere else. That is the biggest fear that colleges have, and I can't say this enough. You have to think about it from their perspective, not your own, and put yourself in their shoes, care about them, and think about what they need to hear. What they need to hear is that you're going to go there and it's your first choice, and that if admitted, you'll attend. It's that simple. And I think in your letter to them, you should say that right up front. You should also update them if you're on a wait list. You should update on your recent accomplishments academically first, and then leadership second. Remember, that's the order. Okay, academics first, leadership second, and remember, put yourself in their shoes and tell them that they're your first choice and that if admitted, you will attend. Okay, go ahead and put that in the beginning paragraph right off the bat and put it in your last one if it's true. If you can say that, it's great. So this person, for example, said, I'd like to update you on my accomplishments since submitting my application. Below is a complete list of my accomplishments. Excellent paper, From Reality to Absurdity, the martyr figure in Camus and Gogol. That actually sounds pretty intellectual, right? So the teacher probably just said, "Hey, good job, excellent," and they gave him an A, excellent job, A. They made that into that academic distinction. Said excellent paper. Then they took the title, From Reality to Absurdity, and the martyr figure in Camus and Gogol, and then they gave the title of the class, and then they gave the school, and then they gave the date, right? If you take the time to give that detail, it'll stick in their brain. This is all marketing, people. And if you take the time to give them details, that stuff sticks in their brain. Concrete sticks in their brain. The clouds don't. If you're just giving them, like saying, oh, great paper, and you put down AP English, great paper, Camus and Gogol, it's okay, but it's not as good as this, right? This will stick in their brain. The other stuff's like half cloudy or all cloudy, okay? All right. So one of the things we can do now, and just if you do you have a need for additional support, obviously you can, or information that you need, there's a lot of stuff on my website here. You can also like me on Facebook or like our company on Facebook, and there's a blog, and you can also go to the book site, brandubook.com, and you can also get some more information there that might be helpful for you. Okay, so let's go ahead and answer questions that you have. Well, these schools obviously have fewer weaknesses. I was just looking. Lucky for you, I mean, we talked about Princeton already. Let's talk about Rice. Lucky for you, I was just looking at Rice's yesterday. I was looking at their vision for their organization, and that's what you can do. You can go and look at their vision. Most of these schools have strategic plans, right, or their vision for their organization or their school. Rice says, hey, look, their bottom line was, we just need to stop being so localized. We need to be bigger. Part of it is they only have 3,000 students roughly, undergrads. If they want to make a bigger impact in the world, they already have pretty good citations, but they need to have more research citations, more of a focus on graduate research, I guess, is really what they're saying. Although it's such an awesome undergraduate school because it's small, they're saying we need to have more research stuff going on. We need to publicize that more through research citations. We also need to get on the map more, and the way we're going to do that is probably to grow. We need to have more students. So that's something that you might look at. So they're also wanting people from different places. They're saying they want more international, more of an international profile. They want more diversity, that kind of thing. So it's really interesting. So if you look at their thing, if you fit into any of those categories, if you look into their strategic plan, that might give you a chance for admission there. So what you've got to do is there aren't many sites that have it. One of them, I think it's called Big Picture, but it's really College Board. You can look at College Board, and they have some good stuff. It's a year or two old. Honestly, the best thing you can do is just Google around and try to find the recent stuff, or call the colleges themselves. Just ask. They're pretty busy right now, or they're going to be even busier, but it's worth taking the time and trying to get through to them and just to find out what the transfer rates are, because that's really, really important. There may be, but look around, a little bit on the websites and stuff too. Unfortunately, and College Data is another site that may have it. But from what I've seen, I think it's called Big Picture at College Board has good transfer data, and then calling the schools is the next best thing. Do I have a shot? I do a lot of, I'm doing a lot of different. I do have great leadership stuff. Doesn't that count for anything, right? It doesn't. It doesn't. But Joy, remember the hierarchy here of their needs, right? It does. It helps you in life. Leadership helps you. The fact that you're super involved helps you. But what you want to really do is get into these involvements and say, is there an academic component to any of these? Am I publicly speaking? Am I writing anything? Am I critically thinking? What is there in here? Am I tutoring people? These are the things that colleges care about. Am I speaking Spanish? What am I doing? Anything like that. Language. So there's three basic categories to education. There's humanities, which is, things like philosophy. It's the human condition and discovering the human condition, and history and stuff like that. And then you have, and some categories may bleed into that a little bit, like languages and stuff like that. Literature is obviously English. But then you have sciences, and that's kind of in a little bit more of an airtight compartment too. And that's, all the sciences, right? And math could be there too. And then you have social sciences, which are, things like economics and political science. Now, these all run together. I'm not, saying that they don't. But it's really helpful for you to kind of know, to pick out some things that might be really, really relevant, and to think about things that you're passionate about in your life where you've really succeeded, your points of difference, and figure out where teachers have said, third parties, meaning reputable third parties like teachers, not your parents, your classmates, but your teachers, or any kind of outside third party like a judge at, say, a debate competition or a piano adjudicator, something like that, piano competition. Where have people said that you are great at academic things? And you need to write that stuff down, exactly what they said, and you can paraphrase, of course, and then the score that you got, or the gold medal that you won, or the silver medal, whatever it is, and then the organization that gave it and the year. It's that simple. It's not more complicated. But those are the things that you can do to help position yourself. Now, your question, again, Joy, to get back to this thing, is if you have a lower GPA, one of the things that you really need to do is bridge a gap between your GPA and the GPA of the average people at that school, right? They won't even look at you, I'm afraid, if you don't do that. So there's some things that you can do. There's a lot of information on my site. You can look at that. Go to case studies, and you'll see some examples there of what we've done to help bridge the gap in GPA. Okay? This has been great. I really appreciate it. My name again is David Montesano. I'm an admission strategist and president of College Match US. This is our website link here, and please like us on Facebook. We have a Facebook site, got a Twitter page, all that stuff, and also I've got a book that's out. It's going to be coming out, I should say, called brandnewbook.com, and you can check that website out too from my website. You've been a great audience. I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much, and I look forward to the next presentation. Take care.